Life in a Late Woodland Native American Village in Michigan, Part 1 by Dennis M. Morrison. And before I begin this, I want to say that I have noticed a little bit of animosity in some people that I'm making videos that pertain to the Native American prehistory here in Michigan. I don't really understand that. I'm not someone who has just come on the scene lately and decided to put together these videos. I began studying the Native American people in northeast Michigan back in 1985, and so it's not something that I've just begun. I've had a lot of material published in various magazines about the finds that I've made, including the Michigan Archaeologist. And so this is not just something that I recently just decided to do. In a lot of the videos, I am doing nothing more than sharing experiences that I've had over the years with Native American people and with the relics that I've found. And I hope that you'll enjoy them. And I also hope that they may at some point serve some educational or historic value pertaining to the prehistory of northeast Michigan. Anyways, having said that, let me continue with part 1 of Life in a Late Woodland Native American Village in Michigan. Of the many different periods of Native American prehistory in Michigan, the Late Woodland is my favorite. Perhaps this is because so much work I have done out in the field has most often brought me in touch with this particular era. So in presenting this, I will use a lot of personal experience in my assessment of the daily life of those people. I have worked privately on a number of Native American Indian village sites over the years. The artifacts left behind are indeed fascinating and do tell us a lot about the late woodland lifestyles. But to gain a concept of their everyday life takes a lot of digging, but not in the ground, in old documents made when the first Europeans arrived on the scene. What was the individual like? What did they wear? What did they do for employment? How were they entertained? It is questions such as these that I will strive to answer in this series of videos. I think you might be surprised at how alike us, in some ways, these ancient peoples were. The Late Woodland period in Michigan dates from about 1400 years ago to 500 years ago, when contact with the first Europeans destroyed the neighborhood, so to speak. The daily routine, like our own, probably became somewhat monotonous. There was more variety in life, though, because through the course of a year, one person wore many different hats. The duties between the sexes were clearly defined, and a woman did not feel less important because she had her occupations to adhere to. Family life was very, very important also. The family was the basis of village strength. The Late Woodland Village Society held dear some common sense principles which we used to hold dear to. First, as stated, male and female had their roles, and these were not questioned, and in this they found strength. We too held this concept until the late 1960s. We had our defined roles, and it worked out until the feminist movement came to power, destroying those boundaries, and in the process ruining the family unit and the morality of our society. In Late Woodland culture, the male role was really no more important than the female role. The roles went hand in hand to make a whole. The family unit was preserved. They never faced the moral decay which has eaten away at our society like a cancer, because both male and female performed their duties, and in that there was harmony. What were the roles? Well, the male was the hunter, providing the meat for the village that the people need to consume, and this took up much of his time and included not only hunting but fishing. And by far I have found more stone net weights than arrows or spears. The male was also the protector of the village, always watchful for any danger which might threaten. The woman's role was no less important, and she was respected. And her role actually encompassed many more jobs of daily life than did the man's. The Late Woodland villagers often practiced some form of agriculture. The woman was given the very important position of being in charge of the gardens. She cleared ground, planted and harvested. She converted the produce into usable provisions for daily consumption as well as storing supplies for use in leaner seasons. The village was her domain. She would be the one to obtain firewood, gather water, make baskets, bark containers, and pottery vessels. Each of these occupations included many labor-intensive steps, and we'll look at them in more detail in future installments of this series. Yes, the woman had much to occupy her time. For the male, the safety of his village and his family weighed on his shoulders, which is why in part he had to be unencumbered with the domestic occupations. He had to always be ready to lay down his life on a moment's notice. Now let's move on to how the late woodland people dressed. We have a good idea here thanks to early accounts written by the Europeans when they arrived. Upon their coming to these shores, the late woodland ended. They of course used what was at hand, and they were experts at doing that. Styles, so to speak, were pretty uniform, but there was some room for individual expression. Clothing was made from skins of many animals, but deer was the main supplier of the raw goods. When a deer was taken for meat, its skin was used for clothing, and even the bones were used to fashion such goods as awls, needles, and even fishing hooks. Deer was largely used due to its size, and the skin became pliable. Sinew was used for stitching. With the preparation of the sinew for sewing, another important occupation was derived at. Robes were also made from beaver, bear, and other furs. So we can also deduce from this that tanning was another very important occupation, so the raw skins could be made ready for use. Designs were known to have been added to their clothing by the use of porcupine quills, shells, paint, and other items that would add a pleasing touch. The woodland Indians seemed to enjoy pretty things, just as we do today. But the men of the village dressed pretty much alike. In warm weather, the common fare was a simple breechcloth, which sometimes may have had painted or quilled designs added. Sometimes leggings were also worn. Skin moccasins protected the feet, and these had soft soles and a drooping flap. Pendants, called gorgets, were also worn by the men. I have found the remains of broken slate gorgets many times. Gorgets were most commonly shale, but shell ones have also been found. Seashell gorgets in Michigan clearly shows that our woodland dwellers either visited the oceans or traded with people who did. At the old Manhattan Creek site in Oscoda, Michigan, I found the remains of Iroquois pottery from the East Coast. So for more on that find, see my video Captive Heart. But it just goes to show there were known trade routes, and there's no doubt about that. More individuality was obtained by using feathers worn in various manners as well as body painting. Red ochre, graphite, plant and berry juice, charcoal, and soot were used as body paint when mixed with grease. Again, at my old Manhattan Creek site, I made a very unusual find which I termed to be a late woodland makeup kit. The find was published in Indian Artifact magazine some years ago. The kit consisted of a small stone mortar, very similar to a nutting stone, but much smaller, with a shallow depression in the center of it. With this was found a nicely defined finger pestle about 2.5 inches long and circular on the base. The circular end was discolored from the materials that had been ground with it. There was also a nice lump of red ochre and graphite. But best of all was the most beautiful stone knife that I have ever seen. It was over 5 inches long and flawless, and made from Bayport tabular chert. Beads were of great importance, and their use probably gave more individuality than any other aspect of Native American attire. Beads were crafted from many materials, which included fresh and saltwater shell, bone, copper, fossils, stone teeth, ivory, claws, and lots more. In his book, Primitive Man in Michigan, W.B. Hinsdale wrote, "Many beads are found in abundance in graves. These are so placed that we think that they may have been upon strings and were buried with the decorations of the body. Beautiful freshwater pearls have been exhumed. Beads were worn as necklaces, belts, and arm and leg bands. They were also used as hair and head ornaments." End quote. Winter clothing was well suited to the harsh Michigan weather. The people were well acclimated to the weather, which helped some. On the Lewis and Clark expedition across the continent in 1804, they told of seeing naked children playing on the ice beside a snowbound village with little or no notice of the cold at all. The French explorer Charlevoix told that the Potawatomi of southern Michigan wore highly decorated buffalo robes in the wintertime. While I'm not certain about the use of buffalo in Michigan, it is well known that robes of deer fur and bear were worn in the wintertime. Also, deerskin leggings were used. There is a lot to know about the late woodland Indians of Michigan. And this is just really a very brief look at, in the beginning of this series, of what their defined roles were and the type of clothing that they wore. And so hope you've enjoyed this very brief look. And in the next installment, which is a little bit longer, I'll be looking at the production of pottery, which was so important to the survival and the sedentary lifestyle of the Native American in the late woodland period. Thanks for taking a look.